It started innocently enough. Or at least, that's what I told myself at the time. I'm Michael, 35, paramedic, husband to Amelia, and father to a 9-year-old whirlwind of energy named Lily. My life was simple, routine even, and I liked it that way. I was proud of the life I'd built, the family I'd nurtured. But it turns out, no amount of routine can prepare you for betrayal. Amelia, my wife of 11 years, worked as an administrator at a local restaurant. Late hours were part of the gig, or so she said, and I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She had a way of lighting up any room she walked into, and I'd always been a little in awe of her charisma. But lately, things have been off. I just didn't want to admit it to myself. The first crack came courtesy of Lily. It was one of those moments that hits you like a freight train because of how casually it's delivered. "Daddy," she said over dinner one night, her voice curious and innocent. "Why does Mommy always laugh so much with Mr. Daniel?" I froze, my fork suspended in midair. "Who's Mr. Daniel?" I asked, doing my best to keep my tone light. Her face scrunched up in concentration. "The man who comes to see her at the restaurant. He's funny. Mommy always stays late when he's there." I nodded slowly, trying to mask the sinking feeling in my gut. Amelia had never mentioned to Daniel before. Sure, her job meant staying late often, but there was something about Lily's tone, so matter-of-fact, so honest, that set my nerves on edge. "Does Mommy say anything else about Mr. Daniel?" I asked casually. Lily shook her head, already focused back on her plate. "No, but he's nice. He talks to me when I'm there." I forced a smile, but my stomach churned. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Amelia was outgoing, the type to charm everyone around her. Surely it was just harmless small talk with a regular. Still, doubt crept in like a thief in the night. That was the moment I realized things weren't as perfect as I'd let myself believe. I couldn't shake Lily's words. Her innocence made them sting even more. Amelia laughed with Mr. Daniel. She stayed late when he was there. What was I supposed to do with that? I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking things. But the doubt had burrowed deep. I started paying closer attention, listening more carefully to Amelia's stories about work. She talked about the restaurant often enough, the customers, the staff drama, but not once did she mention Daniel. That weekend, Lily and I had our usual father-daughter routine. She wanted to go to the park, so I obliged, hoping a few hours of her giggles would clear my head. But as we walked back to the car, she said something that stopped me cold. "Daddy, do you think Mr. Daniel will be at the restaurant today?" I glanced at her, trying to keep my voice casual. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged. "Mommy said he comes in a lot. She said he's one of her favorite customers." I didn't say anything. What could I say? Favorite customers? That wasn't something Amelia had ever mentioned to me. On the drive home, I felt a strange mixture of anger and dread pooling in my chest. It wasn't the kind of anger that explodes. It was the quiet kind, the one that simmers just below the surface. The kind that makes you start noticing things you'd rather not see. That evening, I decided to ask Amelia directly. We were cleaning up after dinner when I brought it up. "Hey," I started, keeping my tone light. "Lily was talking about someone from your restaurant earlier. A regular, I guess? Mr. Daniel?" I watched her closely. She froze for a fraction of a second, so quick it was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Then she turned to me with a smile that felt just a little too practiced. "Oh, Daniel. Yeah, he's a regular. Comes in a lot. Lily said you stay late when he's there." Her smile faltered, just slightly. "Sometimes, yeah. He's just chatty. You know how people can be." "Do you talk about him a lot at work?" I pressed, trying not to sound accusatory. Amelia turned back to the sink, shrugging. "Not really. He's just a customer, Michael." "Why?" "Lily seems to know a lot about him. Just made me curious, that's all." She didn't answer right away, and when she finally did, her voice was a touch too defensive. "It's nothing. Don't make it into something it's not." That night, I couldn't sleep. Her reaction wasn't enough to accuse her of anything outright, but it wasn't nothing either. I knew Amelia better than anyone, or at least I thought I did, and something about her demeanor didn't sit right with me. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't let it go. The next morning, while Amelia was in the shower, I did something I'd never done before. I picked up her phone. I'm not proud of what I did next. I told myself I was only looking for reassurance, that I wasn't invading her privacy. I was protecting my sanity. But when I picked up Amelia's phone, my hands were shaking. Her phone wasn't locked. That detail stuck with me. Amelia wasn't the kind of person who left her phone unprotected. She'd always kept a password on it before, said it was just for security. Yet there it was, open and unguarded, almost like an invitation. I started with her messages, scrolling quickly past the usual chats with coworkers and family. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely focus. I was about to put the phone down to abandon the whole thing when I saw it. The thread wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. I clicked it open, my stomach twisting with every word. "Thanks for last night. I really needed that. You always know how to cheer me up. It's easy when I'm with you. Same time next week." I couldn't breathe. I scrolled up, skimming past messages that, while not explicitly romantic, carried a familiarity that shouldn't exist between a married woman and a customer. My chest tightened when I saw a photo, a picture of Amelia sitting at the restaurant's counter, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "You look stunning tonight." I put the phone down, my hands trembling. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake the sick feeling in my gut. I went about my morning on autopilot. Amelia kissed me goodbye before heading to work, her smile as warm as ever. If she noticed I was distracted, she didn't say anything. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for what felt like hours. I thought about confronting her right then and there, but what would I say? I didn't have enough to prove anything, and I wasn't ready to let her twist the narrative into something I couldn't control. That night, I decided to take a different approach. While Amelia worked late, I drove to the restaurant. I told myself I just wanted to see what was going on, to observe for myself. I parked across the street, watching the warm glow of the restaurant lights. Sure enough, as the hours ticked by, Daniel appeared. He was tall, well-dressed, and confident, the kind of guy who wouldn't have to try hard to catch someone's attention. He sat at the counter, and within minutes, Amelia was there, laughing at something he'd said. She leaned in close, her body language relaxed, her smile unmistakably genuine. My chest tightened as I watched her pour him a drink, her hand brushing his as she passed the glass. She didn't notice me watching from the car, and for a moment I was glad. I didn't trust myself not to storm in and demand answers. Instead, I stayed until the restaurant closed, until Daniel finally left. He didn't just leave, though. Amelia walked him to the door, and they lingered there, talking quietly. When he leaned in to hug her, I felt the last shred of my patience snap. I waited for her to get home that night, pretending to be asleep when she crawled into bed. I thought about the messages, the way she looked at Daniel, the laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next day, I decided to confront her. The next morning, I could barely look at her. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and doubt. Every time she smiled at me or asked if I wanted more coffee, it felt like a slap in the face. How could she act so normal, so completely unbothered after what I'd seen? When Lily left for school, I finally made my move. Amelia was standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I took a deep breath and steadied my voice. "We need to talk." She looked up, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" My mouth was dry, but the words came out anyway. "Who's Daniel?" Her reaction was instant, a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by something else. Dismissiveness? Annoyance? "Daniel?" she said, feigning confusion. "He's just a customer." "Why? Just a customer?" I asked, stepping closer. My voice was steady, but I could feel the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Then why are you texting him? Why are you walking him to the door after hours? Why does he know how you look stunning on a random Wednesday night?" Her face paled. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she laughed, a forced, hollow sound that only made me angrier. "You're being ridiculous, Michael. He's just a friend. That's all." "A friend?" I said, my voice rising. "Amelia, I saw the texts. I saw the way you were with him at the restaurant. Friends don't act like that." Her eyes widened, and she took a step back, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. "You went through my phone? Are you serious right now?" I scoffed. That's what you're upset about? Not the fact that you've been sneaking around behind my back. I haven't been sneaking around, she snapped, her voice defensive. You're blowing this way out of proportion. Daniel and I are just friends. He's going through a tough time, and I've been there for him. That's it. Really? I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Because those messages didn't sound like someone going through a tough time. They sounded like someone who's a little too comfortable with my wife. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. This is insane. You're acting paranoid. I stared at her, my heart pounding. Am I? Because if it's so innocent, why didn't you tell me about him? Why keep it a secret? Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she was going to lash out. But then her shoulders sagged, and she looked away. Because I knew you'd react like this, she muttered. I knew you'd take it the wrong way. The wrong way? I repeated, my voice cracking. Amelia, you've been lying to me, hiding things. How do you expect me to take that? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, my chest heaving with frustration. I wanted to go after her, to demand more answers, but I couldn't. Not yet. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind replayed every conversation, every late night, every excuse she'd given me. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about everything. The lies, the distance, the fact that I no longer recognized the woman I'd married. By the next morning, I knew what I had to do. If Amelia wasn't going to be honest with me, I'd find the truth myself. I couldn't leave it alone. Her defensiveness, her refusal to answer simple questions, it gnawed at me, eating away any hope I had of trusting her. I needed answers, and if she wasn't going to give them to me, I'd get them myself. That evening, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone again. This time, I dug deeper. The texts with Daniel were still there, as casual and familiar as before, but what caught my attention was her calendar. There were entries I didn't recognize. Dinner with Dee and after-work drinks. None of these were things she'd ever mentioned to me. My chest tightened as I scrolled through her emails, and then I found it, a reservation confirmation for a boutique hotel downtown. My hands shook as I opened it. The reservation was for two, made under her name, dated just last week. The room spun. I clutched the counter to steady myself while rising in my throat. It wasn't just texts or flirtatious comments. She'd booked a hotel room. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a boundary being crossed. This was full-blown betrayal. When Amelia stepped out of the bathroom, I was still sitting at the kitchen table. The reservation pulled up on her phone in front of me. I looked at her, my expression cold and unreadable. Explain this, I said, sliding the phone across the table. Her eyes flicked to the screen, and for a split second, her mask slipped. She looked genuinely terrified. Then she straightened, her face hardening. You're invading my privacy again? She said, trying to deflect. Don't do that, I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. Don't twist this around on me. I want an explanation. Now! She hesitated, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came out. Finally, she sat down across from me, her shoulders slumping in defeat. It's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Really? Because it looks a hell of a lot like you're sleeping with him. I'm not, she said quickly, almost too quickly. I swear, Michael, I haven't slept with him. It's complicated. I leaned back in my chair, my arms crossed. Uncomplicated. Her voice was barely above a whisper. We've just been talking, spending time together. He listens to me, and I don't know. I feel like he understands me in a way I haven't felt in years. Understands you? I repeated, my voice rising. So that's your excuse? You feel understood, so you book hotel rooms with another man? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel sympathy. I didn't sleep with him, she said again. I swear. I thought about it, but I couldn't go through with it. That admission hit me like a freight train. Thought about it. She thought about it. That was almost worse than if she'd just done it. It meant she'd weighed the idea, considered it, and decided I wasn't worth enough to stop herself from getting this far. I stood up, pacing the room as my anger boiled over. Do you even understand what you've done? Do you get how much you've destroyed? Michael. No, I snapped, cutting her off. You don't get to talk right now. I've spent 11 years building a life with you. I've sacrificed for you. I've trusted you. And you repay me by sneaking around with some guy from your restaurant? She opened her mouth, but before she could respond, a small voice interrupted us. Daddy. I turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. My anger drained away in an instant, replaced by guilt. I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. It's okay, sweetheart, I said, my voice soft. Go back to bed. Mommy and I are just talking. She clung to me for a moment before nodding and retreating to her room. When I stood up, Amelia was crying silently, her face buried in her hands. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something, sadness, pity, I don't know, but it wasn't enough to drown out the betrayal. This isn't over, I said coldly. Not by a long shot. Amelia's tears might have fooled me for a moment. The way she swore she hadn't crossed the line completely, how she pleaded with me, claiming it was all just emotional, that she stopped herself before it went too far. For a second, I wanted to believe her, but that second didn't last long. The next day, I couldn't get her words out of my head. I didn't sleep with him, I swear. The conviction in her voice had been almost convincing, but something about it didn't sit right. It felt rehearsed, calculated, like she was saying what she thought I needed to hear. By the time I left for work, my gut told me there was more to the story, and I wasn't about to let it go. That evening, I decided to check the bank statements. I hadn't planned on doing it, but curiosity got the better of me. Amelia and I shared most of our finances, but she had her own credit card for personal expenses. I pulled up the statement, scrolling through the charges. There it was, a charge for the boutique hotel. But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. The transaction timestamp showed she'd paid for an extended checkout the morning after her supposed innocent reservation. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My hands shook as I scrolled further, finding more. A high-end lingerie store, a dinner reservation at a restaurant I'd never been to with her. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. She had lied. She hadn't just been emotionally involved. She had gone all the way. That night, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I didn't trust myself to keep it together. I lay in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with images of her and Daniel in that hotel room, in that lingerie, laughing at my expense. Every time I closed my eyes, it felt like I was watching the betrayal in real time. The next day, I decided to confront her again. I wasn't going to give her a chance to worm her way out of it this time. I had the evidence, and I was ready to watch her crumble under the weight of her own lies. Amelia, I said, sitting across from her at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed. My tone was calm, but my heart was pounding. We need to talk. She sighed, her eyes red from crying all day. Michael, I don't want to fight anymore. This isn't a fight. This is me giving you one last chance to tell me the truth. She blinked, caught off guard. I already told you the truth. I haven't slept with him. Then explain this. I pulled out a printed copy of the hotel transaction, laying it in front of her. You extended the checkout. Why would you need to do that if you weren't there all night? Her face paled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I pressed on. And the lingerie? The dinner? Do you honestly expect me to believe you bought that for yourself? She looked down, her hands trembling. Michael, Don't lie to me again, Amelia. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us? To Lily? The tears came again, but this time, they felt hollow. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. It just happened. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. That's your excuse? It just happened? You don't accidentally book a hotel room, or buy lingerie, or lie to your husband for weeks. You made a choice, Amelia. A choice to betray me. She finally looked up, her face crumpling. Okay, fine. Yes, I slept with him. Are you happy now? Is that what you wanted to hear? The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Even though I already knew, hearing her say it out loud felt like my world was being ripped apart. I stared at her, trying to process the reality of it. How many times? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. What? She stammered. How? Many times? I repeated, each word laced with venom. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. The silence between us was deafening. Amelia wouldn't meet my eyes, her head bowed as if she could avoid the weight of my gaze. I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, my knuckles white. My chest heaved with anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Finally, she broke the silence, not with an apology, but with something that made my blood boil. "You know what, Michael? You're not perfect either," she spat, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and defiance. "You want to act like I'm the villain here, but maybe you should look in the mirror." I blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? You heard me." She leaned forward, her tone growing sharper, more aggressive. "Do you know how lonely I've been? How many nights I've spent wondering if you even notice me anymore? You're always working, always too tired or distracted. Do you even remember the last time we did something fun together?" My jaw clenched. "So this is my fault now? You cheated on me, Amelia. You made that choice, not me." Her eyes narrowed, the tears gone now, replaced by something colder. "It's not just about the cheating, Michael. It's about years of being ignored. Years of you putting your job first, or coming home too exhausted to even look at me. Do you know how humiliating it is to feel like your own husband doesn't want you?" "Humiliating?" I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. "You're lecturing me about humiliation after you paraded your affair in front of our daughter? Do you even know how many times Lily saw you flirting with him?" "She told me everything, Amelia." Her face flickered with surprise, but she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a sneer. "Oh, so now you're dragging Lily into this? That's rich, Michael. Maybe if you'd been home more often, she wouldn't have had to come to the restaurant in the first place." I stood up, my hands slamming down on the table. Amelia stood too, her chair scraping against the floor. "You worked your ass off for yourself, Michael. Don't pretend it was for me or Lily. You love being the hero, the guy who saves everyone, but you can't even save your own marriage." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "Do you even hear yourself right now? You're trying to justify sleeping with another man by blaming me for being a good husband and father." "Good husband?" she shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think showing up with a paycheck makes you a good husband? I needed more than that, Michael. I needed a partner, someone who actually cared about me." Her words were knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. I opened my mouth to respond, but she kept going, her voice growing louder and more venomous. "And let's not forget, you weren't exactly perfect in bed either," she snapped, her eyes blazing. "Maybe if you'd put as much effort into us as you did your job, I wouldn't have needed someone like Daniel." I froze, her words hanging in the air like a bombshell. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She'd taken every ounce of pain and humiliation she'd caused and thrown it back in my face, as if it were my fault, as if I had driven her to it. "You're unbelievable," I said finally, my voice low and cold. "You cheat on me, you lie to me, and now you're tearing me down to make yourself feel better? That's pathetic, Amelia. Absolutely pathetic." She crossed her arms, her chin raised defiantly. "Maybe it is, but at least I'm honest about how I feel now. Can you say the same?" For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel betrayal. I felt nothing. Looking at her, standing there with her defiance and her excuses, I realized I didn't know this woman anymore. And I didn't want to. "Then there's nothing left to talk about," I said, turning toward the door. "You've made your choice, Amelia. Now you get to live with it." I sat across from Amelia, staring at the woman I thought I'd known for over a decade. The truth was out, and the weight of her betrayal was suffocating. I wanted her to say something, to give me some explanation that made sense, but instead, her expression hardened. "Do you want me to say I'm sorry again, Michael?" she snapped, her tone sharper now. "Would that fix everything? Because I'm tired of being the only one to blame here." I stayed silent, my hands resting on the table, but my eyes didn't leave hers. "You think you're perfect?" she continued, her voice rising. "You're not. You're always at work, or too tired to care about what's going on with me. I needed more. You don't even see how checked out you've been." I nodded slowly, not bothering to argue. She was trying to draw me into a fight, to twist the narrative in her favor. But I'd already heard everything I needed to know. "Are you even listening to me?" she demanded, her frustration growing. "You're acting like you're so innocent, like you didn't ignore me for years. Maybe if you'd paid more attention." I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Amelia, don't. She blinked, caught off guard by my calm tone. You made your choice, I said simply. You don't get to rewrite the story to make yourself the victim. You lied, you cheated, and you put our family at risk. That's all there is to it. Her mouth opened, then closed, her anger momentarily faltering. So that's it? You're just going to sit there and act like I'm the only one who messed up? I stood up, pushing the chair back gently. I'm done, Amelia. I don't have the energy to argue with you. You've said enough. She stared at me, her eyes burning with defiance, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. Instead, I turned and left the room, the sound of her voice fading behind me as I walked away. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of clarity. There was no fixing this, no going back. The only thing left to do was move forward. The clarity I felt that night didn't make the days that followed any easier. The weight of what Amelia had done still sat heavily on my chest, but at least now I knew where I stood. There was no salvaging this marriage. It was time to move on for myself and for Lily. The next morning, I made my first call. My friend Alex, a family lawyer, picked up on the second ring. Michael, he said, his voice cautious. What's going on? I need your help, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm filing for divorce. There was a pause, then Alex sighed. I'm sorry to hear that, but if that's what you've decided, I'll walk you through everything. When can you come by? Tomorrow, I said firmly. That night, I started gathering everything I'd need. Financial records, property documents, anything that would help me secure my footing when the time came. I didn't trust Amelia to play fair, not after everything she'd done. She'd already proven she could lie without hesitation. Amelia must have noticed my silence, because she tried a new approach. She avoided me, tiptoeing around the house like a stranger. At one point, she even made an effort to be polite, asking if I needed anything. I didn't bite. Lily, thankfully, was my anchor. I focused on her, keeping her routine as normal as possible. She didn't understand the tension between Amelia and me, and I didn't want her to. At least not yet. 2 weeks later, I served Amelia the papers. I left them on the dining room table before heading to work. When I came home that evening, the house was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Amelia was sitting at the table, the papers in front of her, her expression a mix of shock and anger. So, this is how it ends? She asked, her voice cold. This is how it ends, I replied, meeting her gaze. You made your choices, Amelia. Now we deal with the consequences. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and let out a bitter laugh. Fine, but don't think you're walking away with everything. The division of property was brutal. Amelia fought me tooth and nail over everything. The house, the savings, even trivial items like furniture. But Alex had prepared me for this. I stayed calm, presenting evidence of her infidelity to strengthen my case. In the end, I got what mattered most, Lily. The court granted me primary custody, and Amelia was left with weekend visitation rights. The house was sold, and the proceeds were split evenly, but I didn't care. My focus was on starting fresh with my daughter. When the divorce was finalized, I felt an overwhelming mix of relief and sadness. The life I'd built with Amelia was officially over, but so was the pain of holding on to something that had been broken beyond repair. After the dust settled, I packed what little remained of our old life and left the city where it had all fallen apart. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but staying meant living in a constant shadow of the betrayal. It wasn't fair to me, and it wasn't fair to Lily. She needed a fresh start as much as I did. We moved to a smaller city, one with quieter streets and greener parks. I found a job at a local paramedic station, and while the hours weren't any less grueling, the atmosphere was different. The team was tight-knit and supportive, a stark contrast to the detached chaos I'd left behind. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. Lily adjusted quickly, as kids often do. Her new school had a vibrant community, and it wasn't long before she was coming home with stories about her new friends and their adventures. I made it a point to be more present, helping her with homework, taking her to the park on weekends, and even volunteering at her school events when I could. I wasn't just her father anymore. I was her constant. The move gave me time to reflect on everything that had happened. At first, all I could feel was anger and pain. Anger at Amelia for destroying what we'd built, pain at the memories of the life we were supposed to have. But as the weeks turned into months, those emotions began to shift. I started to see things clearly for the first time. Amelia's betrayal didn't define me. It wasn't a reflection of my worth or the love I'd given her. It was her failure, her inability to appreciate what she had. And while the scars would always be there, they didn't have to dictate my future. I made new friends, too, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. My co-workers at the paramedic station were more than just colleagues. They became a second family. They pulled me into their lives with weekend BBQs and impromptu game nights. For the first time in a long time, I laughed freely, without the weight of suspicion or resentment pulling me down. There was one moment that stuck with me. One of my new friends, Jake, pulled me aside during a team dinner. "You seem lighter," he said, handing me a beer. "Like a weight's been lifted." I smiled, nodding. "Because it has." Lily and I settled into our new routine with a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. The smaller city, the slower pace of life, it was everything we needed to rebuild. I joined a local running club, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for before. It became my therapy, each mile washing away the remnants of my old life. Lily joined a soccer team and quickly became one of the best players, her confidence soaring with every goal she scored. The best part? We were happy, truly happy. Not the forced smiles and strained conversations that had characterized the last years of my marriage, but genuine joy. Our little home was filled with laughter and warmth, the kind of life I'd always wanted for us. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Amelia. I wondered if she ever regretted what she'd done, if she realized what she'd lost. But those thoughts didn't linger like they used to. They came and went, like leaves carried on the wind. The truth was, I'd gained far more than I'd lost. I'd gained a deeper understanding of myself, a stronger bond with my daughter, and a life that felt more authentic than it ever had before. Moving away wasn't just a physical relocation. It was a declaration, a promise to myself and to Lily that we would never settle for less than we deserved. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was looking back. I was looking forward to a future that was ours to build. And it felt damn good.